Welcome to the ninth episode of the Sport Analytics Podcast. Today, we're joined by Dr. Ron Yurko, who is the Assistant Teaching Professor in the Department of Statistics and Data Science at Carnegie Mellon University and also the Director of the Carnegie Mellon Sports Analytics Center. Ron, how are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. Great to have you here, and we would love to, introduce you a bit. So, your path includes interning with the Pittsburgh Pirates, a stint as a data scientist at Zelus Analytics, and completing your PhD at Carnegie Mellon, where you now mentor up and coming analysts, develop open source data tools, and co-organize the annual Carnegie Mellon Sports Analytics Conference. You also have provided valuable guidance to participants in the NFL Big Data Bowl, helping you then navigate massive tracking data sets and advanced modeling techniques. Great to have you here, and we'd love to get started by asking a little bit about your internship with the Penguins. You spent time interning with them, and how did that experience shape your perspective on the practical applications of data analytics in a professional sports setting?
Yeah, so I interned with the Pittsburgh Pirates back in 2014. I was a sophomore at Carnegie Mellon, and at the time, the fun story of how I actually got the internship was I had a really bad super day on Wall Street, but I had an internship offer with the Tampa Bay Rays. So I got back from New York, like they flew me out there, flew back. Was kind of depressed with myself a bit. But I had this Tampa Bay Rays internship offer that I couldn't afford, to be frank with you. I'm from Western PA area, and I thought, all right, why not try to send a cold email to the Pittsburgh Pirates? And I looked up Dan Fox. At the time, he was baseball director of information systems. I think that was his title. And I sent a cold email basically with, I'm a Carnegie Mellon student studying statistics. I received an internship offer from the Tampa Bay Rays, but I'm from Western PA, diehard Pittsburgh Pirates fan. By any chance you're reading this, and the email text is ridiculous. I've looked at it periodically over the years. But fortunately, Dan got back to me, sent me like a little bit of a problem to do, data set, and do some analysis and give some answers to various questions. And then I was lucky enough to get this role where most of my job as the intern during this 2014 season was effectively data collection. So this was pre-MLB StatCast. And so the Pirates, Dan's talked about this publicly, and others as well at the time. There was Mike Fitzgerald, who's currently with the Arizona Diamondbacks, and he spoke about this at the Big Data Bowl last year, which was funny. The Pittsburgh Pirates use the overhead camera at PNC Park and have interns like myself go through and chart where's everybody at on the field at the moment the ball is being released, where's everybody at the field at the moment the ball is crossing home plate or making contact with the bat, where's everybody out on the field when the ball goes into play, like lands in play. So it was a lot of very tedious work of literally charting everything, every movement of all these players in all these home games. And so it was monotonous data collection at its finest. It gave me a lesson of like how data are actually gathered and collected, because it was being used effectively for our defensive positioning, all the shifts that the Pirates were famous for at the time. They were really out in front relative to the league. And then I also had the fun aspect of working on my own research project, and I attempted the holy grail type of task of trying to predict pitcher injuries, which at the time as a sophomore, I really did not know what I was doing. I was reading blog posts, and there was this great blog at the time, Hardball Times, and I read work from people on that. But that led me to this interest of large scale research projects. That was really like my first research experience, was developing my own project with the Pirates. And for myself, just for context, my dream job coming out of high school was to work for the Pittsburgh Pirates. Like that was the dream job.
Yeah.
I played baseball my whole life. I did like this high school senior project all about Moneyball and Pirates payrolls and stuff like that. And and then I got this internship. I realized I don't think I want to do the day to day of working for a team. And it's different now. Like 2014 was a very different world. Now there's these R&D groups at the Pirates, at all sorts of different teams where people are effectively doing research type roles, and that type of position became so much more attractive to me. And I ended up getting involved in research. I was advised by Andrew Thomas, who's now with the Detroit Tigers. He was a Carnegie Mellon professor at the time. And he, along with Sam Ventura, were sort of pioneers in the hockey analytics space. So Sam Ventura then was another person that I sort of latched onto and was advised by in a number of different things, research outside of sports. And then he was at the time a teaching professor here at Carnegie Mellon. And I then started working with him and then a collaborator who was another Carnegie Mellon student, friend of mine, Max Horowitz, on a project Max has started called NFL Scrape Bar. And when I graduated, that's from CMU. I graduated a little early and then started working on that more with Max while I was working in finance briefly. I decided to take a break from school after finishing and go into finance, and realized very quickly I need to go get a PhD so I can go back into academia and focus on research. But then that was my first big project was this NFL scraper, building expected points, building win probability models. So it started from this Pirates internship where that was my first real exposure to working on a long-term research project. And that was the beginning of like my passion for that, to leading ultimately into what I do effectively for a living outside of teaching, working on interesting projects that hopefully I could find some insightful results and develop interesting statistical methodology along the way in order to answer difficult questions. But yeah, sorry, that was a long answer to the question.
All good. Like that was a really detailed answer. Yeah. Thank you. That was really insightful. And also, like, as you described, your journey, after your academic work, you joined Zelus Analytics as a data scientist. How did that industry setting differ from your experience in academia, and what lessons did you bring back to the classroom?
Yeah, so this was while I was finishing my PhD in my final year. I worked as a part-time data scientist for Zelus, that's now been acquired by Teamworks. I think they're officially called Teamworks Intelligence now. It's a really interesting role where Zelus, started by Doug Fearing, Luke Bourne, and Dan Cervone, they created this company that effectively serves as an R&D group, an external R&D group for initially baseball teams, but then branched into other sports. And in a way, it's like there's a number of people that were there that are effectively researchers, people that were writing papers in sports analytics, and then you're developing the metrics from those papers and providing them to your team clients in different ways. And so I was a part-time data scientist that helped work on, this should be no surprise, the NFL side. And that's what a lot of research I've done has been focused on, is working with American football data, American football tracking data. And it was like writing papers for those different types of problems. And I had a great time doing it. And what ended up happening, though, was I was lucky enough that when I was finishing my PhD, this assistant teaching professor role position became available in the department. And I applied and was able to get it. It was just good timing. Like the people at Zelus Analytics are fantastic, really great to work with, and they're doing some really cool work. But I knew if I had the opportunity to be a professor, I could teach, I could share my work, I could make my opinions about the Steelers public, that I can have a much better time with it. Yeah, so that's what then ultimately led me down my path. But it was a valuable experience seeing what it is like as a modern data scientist. And that was very different than like what I did in finance. Finance, I was building logistic regression models to predict the probability of default. It was not the most interesting thing necessarily.
Yeah.
It was difficult problems at times, but this was pretty. I would say like much more deep thinking going on with how do we even what are relevant problems to even think about, what are relevant problems that teams or potential clients will want, what should we start with there, how do we scope out what modeling would need to be done. And then there's also versus the academic side, where academic side you could really go into building some truly interesting models that could take just forever to run.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
But from a side of Zelus or Teamworks, where they need to deliver metrics to teams and their clients and the schools now, like if it's going to take weeks and they need to make a decision the next day, that's pretty problematic.
Mhm.
So that was a good experience for me of just seeing, what is the sort of day to day like, and I've also learned this from doing some consulting with teams, and it helped me become a better instructor, uh, having a sense of so I know what I'm trying to prepare my students for, and
Mhm.
hopefully give them the skills that are going to be appropriate in those roles, rather than just coming out of academia and just be a pure academic and not knowing at all what work life is like outside of academics.
Mhm. Yeah, that sounds like a really interesting journey. And I want to like follow up by asking about your current role. So, as a director of Carnegie Mellon Sports Analytics Center, what does a typical day or week look like for you? So, how do you like balance teaching, research, and mentoring students with other commitments like organizing conferences?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So, yeah, my official job is assistant teaching professor in the
Mhm.
Department of Statistics and Data Science at Carnegie Mellon. But now I'm this director of the Carnegie Mellon Sports Analytics Center. So the
Mhm.
center was launched this fall, and it's really a house for our initiatives, our
Mhm.
sports analytics initiatives that have been taking place over several years now.
Yeah.
So when I started my PhD back in 2017, my one of my mentors, advisors, who's been our department head here at CMU for a number of years, Rebecca Nugent. She had the idea of, oh, we should do a Carnegie Mellon Sports Analytics Conference,
Mhm.
and so uh, I had the opportunity to basically take a leadership position within this type of role, organizing this conference every year, getting a wide variety of people from all over attending, very cool, interesting talks from both academics, industry, students. Last year we had over 250 people in attendance, which
Mhm.
was crazy. We might have broke some fire codes, but the and so that was one piece. And then another role I got to take during my PhD was our department has hosted a summer undergrad research experience program in statistics for many years. But under Rebecca's leadership, the theme for the summer program became focused on sports analytics, and
Mhm.
so I got this opportunity to develop the curriculum for this. And so we call it Carnegie Mellon Sports Analytics Camp. It's a 2-month program, starts beginning of June, ends in July. There's daily lectures, sort of lab activities, and mini projects, and then also a large capstone project that we have students working on with external partners of some kind. So we'll bring in via our network, our friends of local professional sports teams, and they'll pitch a project idea that students can work on with public data, and then we have them come back. Not only do they share that work, do a little presentation and whatnot to our local community here at the end of the summer, but then we ask the students about coming back and presenting at our conference, so they have a national audience in the fall. So I'm pretty proud of like what that program's developed, and so we had both this conference, the summer program, as well as just the continued research that we've been publishing and working on. And once I joined as faculty, I was fortunate that also we're attracting PhD students that are interested in these problems. And Kwong Wen, who's now a third-year PhD student, who I'm advising for his PhD, he's been one of the leaders in the NFL player tracking data space with two-time finalist in the Big Data Bowl and then semifinalist this year. And, you know, working with him and working on new projects, and considering the history of what we've done in the past, not just working myself and other PhD students that I collaborated with, but Sam Ventura and Andrew Thomas, what they did before me. You know, we've been a leader in the sports analytics research space at Carnegie Mellon for a long time. So it felt fitting then when this idea came of let's make this a formal center, and that's going to help lead to opportunities for fellowships for masters, PhDs, postdoc opportunities, help sponsor our summer program and capstone projects that we have just on campus ourselves, both with professional sports teams, as well as we do a lot of different cool projects with our own CMU athletics. You know, we have very passionate student athletes, and we have some interesting data analysis projects given what they've been doing, and you know, it's been a great coming together of a lot of build up and work over time. And so my day to day, you know, I'm a professor. I teach classes, work on research problems, have office hours, have a lot of meetings. I probably, given this role as the director of the Carnegie Mellon Sports Analytics Center, I try to meet with different folks and talk about opportunities and try to attract different things that could be projects or whatnot. And then, there's the balance of when you're trying to organize events. Organizing a conference it's a lot of work. I'm in a groove now, though, with it, that it's easier for me now than what it was years ago. And I was very lucky that Rebecca Nugent, when we were just doing this at first, she did all of the work. I was just got a PhD student that was standing there and sent some emails. So she's made it very easy for myself to now take this role and manage invitations, manage the event in a way. But we have wonderful administrative staff who really make my life easy. And I just get to be the MC of the event when it happens. I don't have to deal with all the food arrival and coordinating swag and things like this. There's a lot that goes into a conference. Yeah. But it's very rewarding at the end when it all pays off. And this center, we're hoping to do more events, not just our conference, more workshops and tutorials, and so there's a lot of things being planned that I'm looking forward to sharing with folks over the coming year.
Yeah, those are some great opportunities, and I hope some of our viewers use that to their advantage. Attending the conference or applying to some of those camps. I think those are great opportunities. You kind of mentioned a little bit about the NFL Big Data Bowl, so kind of want to follow up on that. You've been heavily involved in mentoring students for the NFL Big Data Bowl. Could you describe how you support participants and why competitions like these are so influential in driving sports analytics innovation?
Yeah, so the NFL Big Data Bowl, just for context for listeners that are not aware, it's an annual competition hosted by the NFL. It was spearheaded by Mike Lopez, Director of Data Analytics. I think that's still his title. It might have changed. And what it is the NFL has chips in the shoulder pads and the ball. And so at every tenth of a second, we know where every football player is at on the field on a 2D matrix. Mm-hmm. And we get then, okay, what's their position, what's the speed, what's the direction they're moving, the orientation of their shoulder pads. It's a lot of information. And so for lack of better words, try to figure out what the hell do you do with all that data, right? And so this competition inspires people to then work on different types of problems by having a theme associated with it every year, right? So like a theme of studying receivers, pass defense. Last year was about tackling, very broad themes, right? So people could do a number of different things. This year was about pre-snap to post-snap. And so it's very open-ended usually. Only one year did they do a prediction contest of predicting given information at handoff, how many yards will a running back gain. But most of the time it's very open-ended, so you can get a wide variety of work. And it leads to just very interesting ideas that are being crowdsourced amongst the public, right? And passionate researchers and students working on problems who ultimately they want to build a portfolio for themselves of projects they can point to. Students, anytime they ask me, how do you get started into sports analytics? it's really about building a portfolio of sports analytics projects. All right,
Mhm.
and it's weird because other industries aren't like that. Like I didn't have a portfolio of modeling default on commercial loans.
Mhm.
I went to, right? I just was a statistics major who
Yeah.
had good training in this area,
Mhm.
but for whatever reason, sports, they want to see, are you passionate about sports,
Mhm.
right? And whether that's a good idea or a bad idea, I'm not sure. But the thing I will say is, when you go to something like a big data bowl, it's very rich, complex data, and you get, uh, you know, you have the opportunity to showcase what can you do with that type of rich data. How do you approach it? Then write it up and communicate it via an entry into the competition. So
Mhm.
I always tell students, like, regardless of whatever happens on who gets picked, right? Finalists, semifinalists, whatever. At the end of the day, all that really matters is did you put together the effort and actually complete something?
Yeah.
And if you complete a project and you have that and you can point towards it, that's
Mhm.
great. I mean, that's a major achievement in and of itself.
Mhm.
And people, teams, analysts, vendors, companies, whatever, they look at submissions regardless of if they're the winning submissions. Sometimes, there could be some really interesting non-winning submissions that did something very interesting and, clever and careful that might spark an interest from someone working at a team to go, oh, I should talk to this person because I really like how they approach this particular aspect of their work or whatever it could be. So, just being able to enter in something like this is incredible because
Mhm.
everybody is looking at this, not just NFL teams, MLB, basketball, because that's the other purpose of this competition is it's a pipeline, right? It really was also constructed so that NFL teams have this data. So who should the NFL teams hire? All right. And it's been a massive success. Big kudos to Mike Lopez and his crew for organizing this every year because it's probably I think it's the marquee sports analytics competition now.
Mhm.
There's all sorts of hackathons that are out there. I think the Big Data Bowl is by far number one in terms of what students should think about and what should they work on. And I tell students that are not even interested in football to enter into this because again, like I said, baseball teams, basketball teams, hockey teams, everybody's looking at what people are doing entering the big data pool. And that type of data is relevant across all contexts, right?
Mhm.
All of that type of tracking data, all different leagues have access to this. And I hope one day we'll also get like right now we have the NFL's Big Data Bowl, and there's been a Big Data Cup with data from stathletes, which is pretty interesting. I hope some of the other sports, though, other professional leagues, have like a similar Big Data Bowl, but release samples of the pose data. Let's have some crowdsourced knowledge of what we could do with the elbows at every fraction of a second of different players and athletes on the field, and I hope we get more stuff like that public. One, because it's fun, and two, it leads to really interesting research, and hopefully the other leagues follow. That's why it's funny to me now relative to what it was like when I was an undergrad, where the NFL data landscape to me is incredible.
Mhm.
Uh, we have so much public data, so much play-by-play data. There's charted data that's released publicly, and now we have so much tracking data too, public tracking data samples that are just released every year. And hopefully we get more sports and leagues to do the same.
Yeah, I think that's another great opportunity that our viewers should look at. The Big Data Bowl is amazing. Putting out that data publicly, which everyone could use to good use. Obviously, you've worked with many different fields of statistics. Obviously in sports. You also said you worked in finance for a bit. Like you kind of like in relation to data communication. Translating complex models into actionable insights can be tough. How do you adapt your communication for audiences ranging from coaches and executives to students and fellows researchers?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think of myself, I mean, I am a statistician. I'm a trained statistician, data scientist, I guess, where my role is trying to use these type of techniques to make, to infer and try to answer questions in various ways, estimate quantities, provide some notion of uncertainty about those quantities, and communicate those results. Where I've had to do this with geneticists, bankers. My communication, I've had very limited access to coaches. I would say, like, at CMU, we've communicated things with coaches, but I don't think Carnegie Mellon coaches are necessarily a representative sample. I know professional sports teams tend to have a filter in a way of, like, someone that's working in an R&D group can communicate with somebody and some staff that goes through to the coaching staff, and the coaching staff can communicate with the players. And I think, though, just as a role as a statistician or a data scientist, visualizations and properly conveying uncertainty is crucial, right? And I can't stress the uncertainty piece enough, because all of these things we're doing is we're estimating based on samples of some kind. And how reliable is that estimate? How much should I really trust what I'm reporting? Like, I have a model and it says, there's a 50% chance of this happening. It's like, well, is that a good estimate of 50%? Or every time I said it was 50% chance, it only happened 25% of the time, right? I need to be able to communicate that. I need to be able to actually provide some notion of how difficult a problem trying to work on is. And you work on research projects across different fields where fields vary in terms of how much signal you're really dealing with. Finance is a great example. In a lot of financial problems, there's very little signal, right? And so it can be really easy and naive to just decide, oh, you know what, I'm just going to pull out PyTorch and fit this big ass deep learning model, right? And then think, oh, I'm going to predict things with it. And then all you're doing is just a random walk along noise potentially, right? So versus careful statistical thinking of, let's think about sources of variation that we have in the data. All right, what am I observing? What's my observation I'm observing? Right? What is the basic observational unit? What are groups of points that I might have? Do I have any correlation across observations in some way? Right? In sports, all we're dealing with all the time is correlated data. We have, in a play-by-play data set, yes, you have an individual play, but it involves some quarterback for some team, some linemen, some receivers against some particular defense, and then we'll observe some combination of those players again on the next play and the next play and the next play throughout a game and then throughout a season. And it's likewise across all sports, right? So you have to properly think about that and how it can affect your estimates of uncertainty, right? It leads to lower effective sample sizes than when we assume we have. I get a data set and it's 1,000 rows, but I'm dealing with correlated data. I could actually be dealing effectively with 500 rows, and I didn't even realize it, right? And so now you don't necessarily go into those weeds and details with the non-statistician, the non-data scientist, but if you provide some uncertainty with whatever you're communicating, they're going to hopefully be able to infer that. And that's where you really need to bring in visualizations, right? Everybody loves data visualizations. And, that's the best way of conveying whatever you're trying to estimate, whatever uncertainty you have about things, whether it's error bars of some kind or distributions you're conveying from whatever analysis. The coupling distributions and uncertainty together are going to be the best way to communicate in a reliable way.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think it's really valuable advice, and I kind of want to transition to asking about some of the skills that you think are very essential to break into this industry, or even in academia in general, considering you have experience in both. Which coding languages, statistical methods, or machine learning approaches should aspiring analysts prioritize to build a strong foundation?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So, well, on the coding language side, it doesn't really matter. Anybody that tells you should do one versus the other, they don't know. Don't listen to them. All right, they just have some personal bias. I ignore that. I teach things in Python and R. I've had to do stuff in Julia and Clojure. That's a language. Anyone that's listening, look it up. You'll have nightmares. at the end of the day, what you should learn are the foundations of these methods, of these techniques, right? If I ask somebody, explain to me gradient boosted trees, what they should not say is, so I load up this package called XGBoost, and then I throw it into this hyperparameter tuning grid thing, and like, no, that's not what I want to hear, right? Like, you should understand, okay, what we're actually doing with something like XGBoost is we have these sum of trees that are gradually fitting to on this objective, the gradient of this whatever objective function I have, right? And so what that means is I have to be really careful because I'm stepping along the gradient of some objective function, and I might easily overfit in different ways, or I might go past the optimal depending on my step size and my learning rate and different things. Like understanding what's actually going on behind the scenes is the thing that people should focus on. And once you learn just how to code, right, in some language, just going from one syntax to the next, it can be fairly easy, right? The key thing is when you understand the methods, you understand ridge regression, lasso, random forest, when you understand these techniques, then you're able to know and you get a sense of, okay, well, I'm doing this implementation in R and it has these particular default settings. And then I go over to Python and scikit-learn and it has these particular default settings. And I need to change it to make sure I'm doing things apples to apples, depending on whatever could be easier to work with. I will say Python has the great PyTorch libraries. Like for deep learning, it's probably a lot slightly better. There's Torch in R now, like just a native implementation of Torch. But anytime I've done anything with deep learning, I'm doing it in Python. I teach a NLP class. We do everything in Python, loading transformers, things from Hugging Face. So it's probably a little bit better set up from that perspective. But anytime I deal with anything with data visualizations, and I've had colleagues tell me this too, where even if they do everything in Python, they'll just export it over to R and build visualizations with something like ggplot because of the nice syntax and way of making a high quality visual. Now there are versions of it in Python. I don't think they're quite as intuitive. That's like the only little bit of what I would say is why one language for this is the other. Our package implementations tend to have been written by folks that develop the techniques. So the GlidNet package in R is developed and maintained by the group that developed Lasso and ElasticNet. So they've thought about it in the most careful way possible versus whatever grad student potentially did it for scikit-learn. I don't know if it's actually a grad student, but sometimes that scenario might pop up. So that's one trade-off. But the key thing is focus on learning the methodology. Focus on understanding how these approaches work. Anybody can write code, right? And anybody can use ChatGPT now to spit you out some type of code that could be close to what's going on. But the key thing is, like, are you actually asking for the right thing, right? Are you sure you should be fitting one particular type of model versus another? Are you sure that the assumptions of this one model make sense for your problem? And whatever notions of uncertainty you want to get out of it, are those valid based on the assumptions you're considering? And code doesn't know that, right? Code just whatever you do for code is just the thoughts going into the machine. Right, so you need to make sure that your thoughts about the techniques are correct first, and then figuring out like how to implement it. There could be just a number of different ways that are out there. That's a little bit of me venting in some sense.
I think that I totally agree with you. I think having to learn the methodology behind it is probably the most important part. Rather than the coding, and just the design process behind models is very important as well. I want to end off by asking, you've witnessed substantial growth in the field over the past decade. Where do you see sports analytics heading in the next 5 to 10 years, especially as AI-driven tools and novel data sources continue to emerge?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, I am a statistician, so I tend to always be skeptical about things. But I do think there's going to be some great uses for foundation models. And so what I mean by that are these large, massive, deep learning models that are, quote, pre-trained on massive amounts of data. So imagine if I had the video of every soccer match of some kind, right? And so there are groups that are doing this type of thing where I take the video of every soccer match, and what I'll do is I will build a deep learning model in an analogous way to how ChatGPT and other type of LLMs, large language models that are out there, are built, where I don't need any labels of some kind, but I could pre-train it by having the model predict what's the next frame in the video, or do various other types of things, and I could join like descriptions of what's going on in the video at that time. We have massive amounts of data, right? Massive amounts of these videos across these sports. We have access to other already pre-trained video models, or film models of some kind, and you could leverage those and build off of them for the particular sports setting, and from that you can use it in various ways to generate features, automatically annotate what's going on. And I think that is going to be you already see it becoming a pretty popular discussion point. Like at conferences, there was a presentation at the last New England Symposium on Statistics and Sports, Nessus, where there was a group that presented doing this type of idea for tennis, and it was like automatically annotating what was going on during a tennis match and where the athletes were at. And so we're going to see more of that. But we also need to be able to understand, how do we validate those approaches, right? And like, these things could just spit out predictions of some kinds, and you could use them for different tasks. But how reliable is that, right? Do you have enough data in order to do that task? And that's something we have to study before we just believe this is a true quantity, a true label that it's generating, right? There's uncertainty with everything, and so making sure you're conveying that uncertainty will be crucial. And so I think that's only going to get more and more popular because of the technology and capability we have now. The areas I'm particularly interested in is, well, one, there's a lot of work to still do with player tracking data, right? That's still a frontier. We haven't solved anything yet, in my opinion. And two, we've solved some things, but not everything. And two, there's a lot of sports that we've done nothing with player tracking data. I should add that. But then the next thing, though, are all the pose data. And that's something that's very interesting to me, is what we can learn from these skeletal frames that we have of athletes on fields at all these moments of time. And it's, again, what the hell do you do with all of that that's useful, right? So that to me is the next frontier post the player tracking data. And that you need to bring in an understanding of biomechanics and physics knowledge, and it's going to lead to some really interesting problems. And there are teams that MLB, NBA, they already have access to that type of data. And I think it was the Toronto, the Maple Leaf Sports Entertainment Group. They actually released a public sample of pose data for free throw attempts that they had. And there's also Driveline Baseball. They released some public pose data, I think, from pitcher throws. I can't remember if they had like swing level ones, but those are great samples for people to get started with, and understand this is the next step of the type of data that's being gathered. How do you model that? What are sources of variations, different quantities that you could gather from that? What's relevant? What explains various outcomes you might see in different ways? That's what I'd say I'd be most looking forward to over time. So that's why I'm really hoping that there will be like a professional sports league that decides to do a competition where they release a nice sample of pose data in the wild for researchers and students to get their hands on. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's what makes sports analytics so interesting. There's a lot of data out there, that still hasn't really been tinkered with, and there's gonna be a lot of interesting problems out there. But thanks a lot, Ron, for agreeing to be on this podcast, and your insights and your advice have been really valuable. And to all of our viewers, we already had 9 great episodes of podcasts with professionals in the sports analytics industry, and we have many more to come. So stay tuned. Thank you.